The room was silent. Not the kind of silence that felt calm, but the heavy kind that pressed down on the chest and made breathing slow. He sat on the cold floor, back against the wall, his wrists bruised from the chains that bound them. The air smelled of iron, dust, and something bitter he could never name. Every hour he heard footsteps pass the door, sometimes heavy, sometimes quick. Usually they belonged to guards who only came in to check, laugh, or strike him for no reason. He had learned to wait, to count the seconds, to exist without hope. That night was different. The door opened, but no boots stomped in, no sharp voices, barked commands. Instead, a figure slipped quietly into the room. She didn't move like the others. There was no anger in her steps, no cruelty in her posture. She walked slowly, carefully, almost like she was afraid of disturbing something fragile. He lifted his head, his tired eyes narrowing in confusion. She wasn't armored like the guards. Her uniform was simpler, her face uncovered. He expected her to sneer, maybe throw words of hate at him, but instead, she stopped just a few steps away, watching him with a calm expression. Her gaze wasn't harsh. It was soft, studying, almost searching. He felt his chest tighten. For weeks, maybe months, he had only seen faces filled with disgust or violence, but hers was different. She crossed the small room and lowered herself onto the bench near him. The sound of her sitting was gentle, almost careful, as if she didn't want to startle him. He froze, unsure whether to recoil or stay still. 100 questions screamed in his head. Who is she? Why is she here? What does she want? For a long moment, she didn't speak. She simply sat beside him, hands folded on her lap, eyes meeting his. Her presence was strange, unsettling, but not in a way that felt dangerous. It was almost the opposite. Then, slowly, her lips curved, not into a smirk, not into a cold smile of power. It was small, fragile, but real. A soft smile. He felt something stir inside him that he hadn't felt in so long. Something that hurt because it was almost forgotten. Kindness. His throat burned. His body was weak. Words sat on his tongue, but none came out. He wanted to ask her why she came, why she looked at him like he was more than a broken prisoner, why she dared to smile at someone the rest of her people saw only as an enemy. The silence between them stretched. Yet it wasn't empty. The air felt alive, carrying something unspoken. He couldn't look away from her face. She seemed so calm, so steady, like she had all the time in the world to just sit there beside him. He remembered Earth for a moment. He remembered how, before the war, people smiled like that at each other every day. At a market, on the street, at home after long work. He remembered how his mother used to smile softly when he was a boy, even when food was scarce. Even when life was hard. That memory hit him like a wave, and suddenly his eyes burned. But he didn't cry. He wouldn't give them that. Still, something inside him cracked, just a little. Not in despair, but in something close to hope. He lowered his gaze, breathing, slow, trying to calm the storm inside. Yet even with his eyes down, he could still feel her watching him. Not like a guard, not like a captor, but like someone trying to understand. When he finally dared to look up again, her smile hadn't faded. It was still there, soft and steady. And in that smile, he saw something dangerous. Not a weapon, not a threat, but something far greater. He saw the possibility that maybe, just maybe, not every enemy was the same. And for the first time since his capture, he felt that the darkness might not last forever. The room remained still after she had settled beside him, but the quiet no longer felt heavy. Instead, it was almost alive, charged with something neither of them could name. He could feel her presence like a soft pulse, steady and constant, contrasting sharply with the harshness of the world outside. For weeks, he had lived in a place filled with fear, routine, and pain. Every face he saw carried anger, cruelty, or indifference. But her face, It carried something else entirely. Something like warmth. Neither of them spoke at first. The silence stretched long, yet it wasn't uncomfortable. She didn't fidget, didn't glance around nervously. She simply sat beside him, her gaze fixed on his face, patient and unwavering. He felt exposed under her attention, as though she could see through more than his battered body, through to the thoughts he tried to hide, to the exhaustion he carried in his bones. At first, he didn't know what to say. Words had become heavy lately, each one a reminder of his weakness, of the failure he felt daily. His throat burned, but nothing came out. She seemed to sense this, and instead of pressing him, she offered only her presence, calm and understanding. That simple act, her patience, her choice to sit there silently, was more comforting than anything he had known in months. He remembered the world before capture, before the chains, the hunger, the endless battles. He remembered the quiet moments, at home, the laughter of friends, the songs of the wind through trees. He remembered his mother's smile, soft and gentle, even in the hardest of times. That memory struck him suddenly, and for a moment his chest ached with longing. How long had it been since anyone had shown him that kind of simple, quiet care? He couldn't remember. She shifted slightly, enough to catch his gaze. Her eyes didn't flinch. They didn't judge. Instead, they held a kind of quiet understanding that made him pause. He wanted to ask why she had come, why she moved through a world filled with enemies and yet chose to sit beside him, why she smiled at a prisoner, a soldier beaten and broken, as if he were not merely a thing to be defeated but a person worthy of attention. The faint smile she offered seemed to say it all without a single word. It was fragile, yet unshakable. And in that simple curve of her lips he felt a warmth he hadn't known in months, maybe years. Hope flickered inside him, cautious and uncertain. But it flickered nonetheless. Minutes passed. The distant noises of the bass, the shouts, the clanging of doors, the soft footsteps continued. But inside that room those sounds seemed to fade. For the first time since capture, he could breathe without fear pressing on him from every side. He felt, just slightly, that he was not entirely alone. Slowly, almost hesitantly, he spoke. His voice was rough, cracked from disuse and despair. "Why, are you here?" She tilted her head, considering him, but didn't answer right away. Instead, she gave him a small nod, as if acknowledging his question and giving him space to think. Then she said softly, "Because I can see you. Not the soldier, not the prisoner, but you. The part of you they cannot take away." Her words were like a balm, soothing in their simplicity. They weren't dramatic. They weren't grand declarations. But they mattered more than anything else he had heard in months. They reminded him that despite all the suffering, someone could still recognize humanity, could still offer kindness without demand or expectation. He lowered his gaze, feeling something he thought he had lost, the fragile stirrings of trust. It was dangerous to trust anyone here, especially someone from the other side, but he felt the urge growing, quiet and insistent, like the first light of dawn creeping over a dark horizon. For a long time, they sat in silence again, side by side, two beings connected by a fragile thread that neither could see but both could feel. The weight of the world was still pressing outside, but inside the small room, that weight seemed to lighten, even if only a little. And in that shared silence, he realized something he hadn't dared to think in a long time. Maybe not all enemies were the same. Maybe even in a world of war and cruelty there were exceptions. And maybe, just maybe, this quiet, soft presence beside him was one of them. He dared to look at her again. Her eyes met his, steady and unwavering. And in that gaze he felt something he had almost forgotten. Hope. The days stretched on, each one blending into the next. But that night, the air in the room felt different. The soft light from a crack in the ceiling painted her face with warmth, making her features glow as she leaned slightly closer, still sitting beside him. He could feel her presence like a quiet pulse, steady and calm, a stark contrast to the chaos of the world outside. For the first time since his capture, he felt his thoughts uncoil, tangled as they were, and he wondered if she understood anything at all about what it meant to survive in this cold, relentless place. Then, finally, she spoke. Her voice was low, almost a whisper, as if afraid someone might hear, but it carried weight, more than any shout or command had ever done. "Why do you keep fighting?" The question hit him harder than a blow to the ribs. It wasn't an accusation. It wasn't pity. It wasn't judgment. It was a simple question, asked with curiosity and something like awe, and yet it cut through the armor he had built around himself. He had asked himself that question hundreds of times, in the dark, in pain, when hope felt like a memory. Why did he keep going? Why did humans keep rising even when it seemed impossible? He wanted to laugh bitterly. He wanted to tell her it was pointless, that every day was filled with loss, fear, and the knowledge that most of them would never see freedom again. But he didn't, because something in her eyes, something steady and patient, made him hesitate. Instead, he whispered, hoarse and raw, "Because it matters." Her gaze didn't shift. She didn't look away. There was a long pause filled with the sound of distant echoes from the base, the subtle hum of machinery, and the faint drip of water somewhere in the corner. Her head tilted slightly, as if she was trying to weigh his words, trying to understand what they carried. Her eyes softened, and for a moment he felt exposed in a way that terrified him. He was a soldier, a prisoner, a broken man. Yet here she was, giving him her full attention, treating his answer like it was precious. "Because it matters," she repeated, almost to herself, her voice trembling slightly. She studied him as if she was trying to memorize something invisible, something that only humans carried. Even when it seems hopeless, even when everything is lost, you rise. He couldn't look at her. The intensity in her eyes was uncomfortable, but in the best possible way. It made him remember who he was. Not just a body in chains, not just a survivor, but someone who had loved, who had dreamed, who had lived before the world turned cruel. "I don't understand," she admitted finally, her hands tightening lightly in her lap. Why would anyone keep going when the world is so determined to break them? Her question wasn't meant to mock him. It wasn't meant to scare him. It was honest, human in a way that made him ache. He wanted to answer, but the words felt too fragile, too small. All he could do was shift slightly and whisper, "Because if we stop, then there's nothing left. Nothing at all. We fight because giving up means we lose everything. We fight because one day, maybe someone will see us rise and know it's possible too." She nodded slowly, almost imperceptibly, her eyes reflecting something like awe or wonder. "Your people, your kind, you are remarkable." He could feel a lump in his throat. Remarkable? They were just survivors. They were just stubborn. But somehow, through her voice, it became more. Somehow, through her quiet attention and gentle curiosity, his struggles felt validated, like someone had finally noticed the weight he had carried every day. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The war outside raged on, but inside, in that small, quiet space, time seemed to slow. He felt her presence, her calm strength, and he realized that she wasn't just sitting beside him. She was giving him a choice, not to escape the room, not to defy the enemy, but a chance to reclaim a piece of himself that had been lost in the chains, in the pain, in the endless fighting. And in that moment, he understood that her question wasn't just about him. It was about hope. It was about humanity. And maybe, just maybe, he could keep fighting. Not just for survival, but for something worth believing in again. The days that followed were quiet, but the air between them carried an unspoken tension. He noticed the way she moved in the room, always careful, always deliberate, as if the walls themselves might betray her presence. She wasn't like the other soldiers. She didn't bark orders. She didn't strike fear into anyone. There was a gentleness in her movements, a kind of patience he hadn't seen in years. Every time she sat beside him, the space seemed smaller, warmer, as if the world outside had momentarily disappeared. One night, the curiosity in her eyes overcame her silence. She spoke slowly, carefully, almost as if testing the words before releasing them. You don't give up. Even when everything is against you, you don't stop. I don't understand it. He looked at her, tired and raw, and almost laughed at the simplicity of her observation. He had asked himself that question hundreds of times. Why do we keep fighting when there is nothing left? Every mission lost, every friend gone, every hope shattered. It was a cycle of pain. And yet he continued. You don't understand, he said softly, his voice hoarse from days without proper rest. We fight because it's all we know. Giving up, it's not an option. Even when everything seems impossible, we have to try. We have to keep going for ourselves, for everyone who can't. She tilted her head as if trying to see inside his thoughts. Her eyes were wide, searching, full of a mixture of amazement and disbelief. Even when you know it might be pointless. He swallowed hard, feeling the bitter truth of her words. Even then, humans, we find strength in impossible places. We rise when we shouldn't. That's how we survive. For a long moment, she stayed silent, letting his words sink in. Then softly she said, You're kind. It's remarkable. You hold on when anyone else would break. Her voice trembled slightly, betraying a rare emotion he couldn't name. Respect, awe, something deeper, something almost human. He realized then that she was different from the others, not just in action, but in thought. She saw him not as an enemy to be defeated, not as a prisoner to be crushed, but as a person capable of hope, even when hope seemed impossible. And that realization stirred something unfamiliar inside him. Trust. Why are you here, really? He asked quietly. You don't belong with them, do you? Her hands twitched in her lap. She hesitated, and he saw a flash of conflict cross her face. I'm not like them, she admitted, her voice small. I was born into this war, like everyone else, but I can see the difference. I can see that not all humans are the same. Not all of them are enemies in the way the others want us to believe. He studied her carefully. It was dangerous to trust anyone, especially someone from the other side. Yet the sincerity in her eyes, the quiet way she had stayed by him, made him wonder if perhaps there were exceptions in a world full of cruelty. You shouldn't care about me, he said, shaking his head slightly. It's dangerous for you. If they see you helping me. She leaned closer, almost imperceptibly, her voice firm now. I see more than your wounds, your chains. I see your courage, and that matters more than any rule, more than any order. For a moment, the distance between them shrank. The war, the violence, the endless days of fear, they felt distant, like they existed in a different world altogether. Here in this small room, she offered a space he had almost forgotten existed, a place where someone could choose to be kind, to understand, to see beyond labels and ranks. He wanted to tell her everything, about the battles, about the losses, about the people he had failed to save. But the words stayed buried, because even now he didn't fully understand them himself. Yet her presence was enough. Just sitting beside him, asking questions, listening, believing. It gave him strength he hadn't felt in years. And, for the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to imagine a world where enemies could become allies, where trust wasn't impossible, and where hope could survive even in the darkest corners of war. Her smile returned, faint but genuine, and he realized that despite everything, they were beginning to understand each other. Two souls from opposite worlds, finding common ground, in silence, in questions, and in small acts of bravery. And in that understanding he felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. The fragile stirrings of hope. The nights had become their secret. Every evening she would slip quietly into the room, moving as carefully as a shadow, and sit beside him. Each time she brought something small, a drop of water, a scrap of bread, a piece of cloth to wipe the grime from his face. The guards never seemed to notice her absence. Perhaps they assumed she was busy with her own duties. Perhaps they did not care. Either way, her small acts of kindness became the lifeline he had been waiting for, though he would never admit it aloud. One night, she entered carrying a small tin of water. The liquid was clear and cool, unlike the stagnant, foul water he had been given for days. She knelt beside him and offered it gently. His hands trembled as he reached for it, the chain around his wrists rattling softly. "You shouldn't," he whispered hoarsely, his voice tight with fear. "If they see you, they'll what?" she asked softly, placing a reassuring hand near his, though not touching him fully. "Do you think I care?" Her words struck him with a mixture of awe and disbelief. Most people, most soldiers, only cared about rules, orders, and survival. She cared about something else entirely. He lowered the tin and drank slowly, letting each drop fill the emptiness inside him. The taste of clean water was strange, almost alien, but it brought tears to his eyes. "You risk too much," he said finally, looking up at her. "I don't want to see you hurt because of me," she smiled, faint but unwavering. "I've already decided," she said simply. "If helping you means risking myself, then it's worth it. You are worth it." The words were dangerous, almost reckless, in their honesty, but he didn't argue. He couldn't. His heart, long hardened by pain and fear, fluttered in a way he hadn't felt in years. She wasn't just an ally, not just a friend. She had become a reminder that courage existed beyond the battlefield, beyond orders and survival. For hours, they sat in silence. The distant hum of the bass and the occasional clatter of boots outside were the only sounds. And yet, the room felt alive. Alive with something far more powerful than fear. Trust. She asked questions then, soft, quiet, probing questions that made him pause and think. She wanted to know about his world, about Earth, about the lives they had led before the war. He spoke cautiously, painting pictures of oceans, forests, cities full of laughter, and songs people sang before the world had turned against itself. Each word felt like a bridge, stretching across the impossible divide between them. She listened, her eyes wide, her expression unreadable but full of attention, as if memorizing every detail for herself. "You humans, you carry so much weight," she said finally, "and yet you endure. You endure in ways I cannot fully understand." Her words were praise, but more than that. They carried something almost dangerous, a recognition of his humanity, a belief in it. And he realized then that her presence, her willingness to care, had become more than comfort. It had become a lifeline, a reason to keep holding on, even when the walls around them felt suffocating. The risk she took was evident in every glance, in every movement. One wrong step, one moment of suspicion from her superiors, and she could be lost to him forever, or worse. Yet she returned night after night, unwavering. It was as if she had chosen to stand with him, not as a captive, not as an enemy, but as something entirely different, an ally of the heart. And for the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to imagine a future beyond the chains. A future where someone believed in him, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. A future where trust could exist even in a world built on violence. That night, as she finally rose to leave, she looked at him with a faint, almost tender smile. "Rest," she said softly. "Tomorrow, we keep going." He watched her slip into the shadows of the corridor, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the room or the water she had given him. It was the warmth of hope, fragile and fleeting but real. And he realized that the risk she took for him was not just physical. It was emotional, a defiance of everything she had been taught, everything the world demanded. And somehow that risk made him feel alive again. The base was restless that night. Alarms echoed faintly in the distance, a constant reminder that the war outside never truly slept. He could feel the tension in the walls, the vibrations of distant footsteps and hurried voices. Yet, despite the chaos, she appeared as quietly as ever, slipping into the room without a sound. Her eyes were sharp now, alert, but the soft smile that had become her signature was still there, a beacon amidst the darkness. She didn't speak immediately. Instead, she sat beside him as she always did, letting him adjust to her presence, letting the silence stretch between them. But this night was different. The danger outside pressed closer, and he could sense it in her movements, the slight stiffness in her shoulders, the way her eyes flicked toward the door as if expecting it to burst open at any moment. Finally, she spoke, her voice low and urgent. "They're coming. They know something is wrong." He swallowed hard, fear crawling up his spine. "Then we don't have much time," he whispered. The chains around his wrists rattled as he shifted, and she reached over to steady him, her touch light but grounding. "We can't stay here," she said firmly, though her voice carried a tremor of worry. "You have to come with me, now." He hesitated. The thought of escaping with her, of running through the hallways filled with armed soldiers, seemed impossible. "They'll kill you," he said, panic creeping into his voice. "If they find you helping me, You think I don't know that?" She interrupted, her eyes locking onto his. "I've chosen this. I've chosen you. If I die for it, so be it. But I won't let them take you. Not now. Not ever." Her words struck him like a storm. Courage, defiance, compassion. It was all there, packed into that simple declaration. He had never seen anything like it. And for the first time, he felt the overwhelming weight of what it meant to be seen. Not as a prisoner, not as a victim, but as someone worth risking everything for. They moved together then, slipping through shadows and empty corridors. The alarms grew louder, soldiers shouting commands, doors clanging, lights flashing red. But she guided him with a steady hand, moving quickly but deliberately, never letting him fall behind. Every step was a test of trust, a challenge to the rules they had both known since birth. Somewhere in the distance, a shout rose, a sound of discovery. He froze, fear tightening around his chest. But she didn't falter. She leaned closer, whispered, "Keep moving. Trust me." And he did. They ran together through smoke and debris, through corridors twisted by chaos, until they reached a side exit, a small door that opened to the outside world. Beyond it, the sky was dark, lit by the distant fires of battle, the war raging like an unrelenting storm. She paused, looking back at him, her hand on the door, her eyes searching his for hesitation. "Are you ready?" she asked softly. He nodded, though his heart pounded with fear and adrenaline. "I'm ready," he said. They stepped into the night together, the cold wind biting at their faces. Behind them, the base erupted in shouts and chaos, but they didn't look back. For the first time, he felt a strange, exhilarating freedom, a rush of life that had nothing to do with survival alone. Finally, they found a small clearing, far enough from the base that the sounds of war were muffled, distant. They collapsed onto the ground, breathing heavily, hearts pounding. She sat beside him, just as she always did, close but not intrusive, her presence a shield against the fear that still lingered. He looked at her then, really looked, and saw not just the girl who had helped him escape, but someone who had chosen courage over fear, someone who had risked everything for him without hesitation. And in that moment, he realized something profound. Humanity wasn't just about survival. It was about the choices we made, the risks we took, and the kindness we offered even when it seemed impossible. She turned to him, her face softening, and smiled, the same gentle, unwavering smile that had first drawn him out of despair. "Rest," she said, her voice almost a whisper. "We've made it this far. Tomorrow, we'll keep going." And for the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to rest, not just his body, but his mind, his heart. He had seen fear and cruelty. He had faced loss and despair, but in her presence he felt something stronger. Hope, courage, trust. And he knew that as long as she was beside him, they could face anything. Together. The base was restless that night. Alarms echoed faintly in the distance, a constant reminder that the war outside never truly slept. He could feel the tension in the walls, the vibrations of distant footsteps and hurried voices. Yet despite the chaos, she appeared as quietly as ever, slipping into the room without a sound. Her eyes were sharp now, alert, but the soft smile that had become her signature was still there, a beacon amidst the darkness. She didn't speak immediately. Instead, she sat beside him as she always did, letting him adjust to her presence, letting the silence stretch between them. But this night was different. The danger outside pressed closer, and he could sense it in her movements, the slight stiffness in her shoulders, the way her eyes flicked toward the door as if expecting it to burst open at any moment. Finally, she spoke, her voice low and urgent. "They're coming. They know something is wrong." He swallowed hard, fear crawling up his spine. "Then we don't have much time," he whispered. The chains around his wrists rattled as he shifted, and she reached over to steady him, her touch light but grounding. "We can't stay here," she said firmly, though her voice carried a tremor of worry. "You have to come with me, now." He hesitated. The thought of escaping with her, of running through the hallways filled with armed soldiers, seemed impossible. "They'll kill you," he said, panic creeping into his voice. "If they find you helping me, You think I don't know that?" She interrupted, her eyes locking onto his. "I've chosen this. I've chosen you. If I die for it, so be it. But I won't let them take you. Not now. Not ever." Her words struck him like a storm. Courage, defiance, compassion. It was all there, packed into that simple declaration. He had never seen anything like it. And for the first time, he felt the overwhelming weight of what it meant to be seen. Not as a prisoner, not as a victim, but as someone worth risking everything for. They moved together then, slipping through shadows and empty corridors. The alarms grew louder, soldiers shouting commands, doors clanging, lights flashing red. But she guided him with a steady hand, moving quickly but deliberately, never letting him fall behind. Every step was a test of trust, a challenge to the rules they had both known since birth. Somewhere in the distance, a shout rose, a sound of discovery. He froze, fear tightening around his chest. But she didn't falter. She leaned closer, whispered, "Keep moving. Trust me." And he did. They ran together, through smoke and debris, through corridors twisted by chaos, until they reached a side exit, a small door that opened to the outside world. Beyond it, the sky was dark, lit by the distant fires of battle, the war, raging like an unrelenting storm. She paused, looking back at him, her hand on the door, her eyes searching his for hesitation. "Are you ready?" she asked softly. He nodded, though his heart pounded with fear and adrenaline. "I'm ready," he said. They stepped into the night together, the cold wind biting at their faces. Behind them, the base erupted in shouts and chaos, but they didn't look back. For the first time, he felt a strange, exhilarating freedom, a rush of life that had nothing to do with survival alone.